My name is Monica. I'm 61. Last night, my own son beat me so hard I started bleeding, all because the soup I made didn't have salt. While I crouched on the kitchen tiles, wiping the blood from my face with an old cloth, he simply walked to his room, shut the door, and drifted off to sleep, as though striking his mother were as ordinary as breathing. When daylight came, my body throbbed with pain. Dark bruises covered my arms, and a split lip stung each time I moved my mouth. Yet what cut the deepest wasn't the ache, but the disgrace. The realization that the child I raised with devotion, the one I sacrificed my life for, now viewed me as nothing more than his servant. It felt like I existed only to obey him and stay silent. At 5 a.m., as always, I pulled myself out of bed. Ethan was already seated at the kitchen table, dressed sharply in his gray suit, his eyes glued to his phone. Without so much as a glance, he muttered, "Breakfast. Hurry, I've got a meeting." The tone was flat, indifferent, as if the shouting, the insults, the threats from the night before had never happened. He'd told me I was useless, that if I weren't his mother, he'd toss me into the street. I cooked his scrambled eggs exactly the way he demanded. 3 spoonfuls of shredded cheese, 2 slices of toasted bread, and black coffee without sugar. Everything had to be flawless. One mistake, even a tiny one, could set him off. And when Ethan lost control, I was always the target. While he ate, I heard the front door open and the familiar click of a key turning in the lock. In walked Savannah, his young, stylish wife, her light green dress swaying as her heels tapped across the floor. She leaned down, kissed Ethan's cheek, then settled at the table like she ruled the house. With that sugary tone she reserves for when he's near, she said, "Good morning, Mrs. Davis. How are you today?" I wanted to tell her the truth, that her husband had left me covered in bruises, that my back burned with pain, that I couldn't endure another day. But I swallowed the words, forced a small smile, and answered softly, "I'm fine. Thank you." Then I added, "Would you like some breakfast, Savannah?" Ethan's glance cut through me like a blade, a silent warning that promised a darker night if I said even one wrong thing. Then, with that insincere smile he always wears when someone's watching, he said, "Look, Mom, I got you some new makeup. It'll help hide those tiny scrapes from your fall last night." Tiny scrapes. That's what he called the bruises and cuts he'd given me, pretending I'd stumbled into his fists by accident. I accepted the makeup quietly. It was a pricey foundation, the kind that sells for more than $50, and I knew exactly where the money had come from. My own retirement fund. He controls all my finances, claiming it's safer that way, that an older woman like me can't manage money anymore. In truth, I haven't touched a cent of my pension for nearly 2 years. Savannah looked at him with those admiring eyes that made my stomach twist. "You're so sweet, honey. Always caring for your mom," she said, completely unaware of the monster beside her. She saw only the polished executive who handles million-dollar accounts, not the man who vents his rage on me once the front door closes. When breakfast ended, Ethan straightened his red tie, grabbed his sleek briefcase, and leaned close while Savannah checked her lipstick. His whisper was sharp and cold. "Remember what we talked about. Say one word about what goes on here and you'll pay for it. Nobody would believe you anyway. You're just some crazy old woman living off her son's kindness." The words froze me inside. They walked out hand in hand, the picture of marital bliss, and I watched from the window as they slipped into his new black sedan, worth over $100,000, every bit of it bought with my money. Once their voices faded and the house grew still, I sank into a chair in the kitchen and let the tears fall. They weren't tears of sorrow that fell, but tears of fury and despair, because deep down I knew something had to change, yet I had no idea where to begin. I couldn't go on living this way, trapped and terrified, but I couldn't see a way out either. I sat there for hours in that quiet kitchen, staring as the sunlight crept slowly across the tiled floor. Once this house had been my refuge. I bought it 3 decades ago, after years of saving from my job as an executive secretary at Sullivan and Associates. I had devoted 40 years to that firm, always arriving before sunrise, keeping everyone else's life perfectly in order. I never dreamed that one day I'd be held captive within these same walls. It all began 3 years ago when Ethan split from his first wife. He arrived late one evening, suitcase in hand, wearing that same wounded expression that always weakened me. "Mom, I just need a place to stay until I get back on my feet," he said. He claimed the divorce had ruined him. No house, no savings, nowhere else to go. And like the foolish mother I've always been, I opened both my home and my heart. "Of course, son, this is your house too," I told him. I couldn't have known then that I was letting evil step through my door. At first, everything seemed fine. Ethan kept to a routine. Early mornings, long work days, quiet dinners together. He even joined me for grocery runs. For a while, I believed we might finally build the kind of bond I had always wished for. But gradually, the tone changed. It began with small criticisms. "Mom, the food's too salty. Mom, you missed a spot in the bathroom. Mom, your clothes are too wrinkled." It's embarrassing. The remark stung, but I convinced myself he was simply under pressure from the divorce. Then his attention turned to my money. "Mom, it's unsafe for someone your age to handle so much cash. Let me take care of it for you." And like the trusting fool I was, I let him. I told myself he only wanted to help. He was my son, after all. But within 6 months, Ethan had full control. My entire $1,200 monthly pension was redirected straight into his account. He started giving me $20 each week for my own needs, like a parent handing out pocket money to a child. Whenever I asked where the rest of my pension went, he'd respond smoothly, "Mom, I'm investing your savings so they can grow. You have to trust me." Then came Savannah, 25 years younger than Ethan, with a dazzling smile and a hunger for status that was impossible to miss. They met at his office where she worked as a marketing assistant, and within 6 months they were married in a lavish ceremony that cost more than $100,000. Paid entirely with my money. From the moment she entered our lives, everything spiraled downward. Ethan began treating me like the hired help. "Mom, cook dinner for Savannah and me. Something elegant. She likes refined food. Mom, make sure the guest bathroom is spotless. We're having important company. Mom, wash this shirt by hand. It's too nice for the washer." And I complied with every command, terrified of provoking his anger, terrified that he might make good on his threats to throw me out of my own home. Even though the deed was originally in my name, he convinced me to add his "for protection," he'd said. "Mom, just in case something ever happens to you." The violence began about a year ago. At first, small things that I tried to dismiss. A shove disguised as an accident, a sharp pinch on my arm when I was too slow. "You're driving me crazy, Mom. You can't do anything right." Then came the slaps, the blows to my shoulder when he didn't like the food, the strikes to my back if I wasn't cleaning fast enough. But last night was different. Last night, he went further than ever before. I had made a simple vegetable soup for dinner, our usual light Tuesday meal. I set the table carefully, placed the toasted bread, and ladled the steaming soup into bowls. Everything had been set perfectly that evening. Ethan walked in from work, looking exhausted, dropped into his chair without a word, and tasted the first spoonful. His face twisted with anger. "What is this?" he roared, spitting the soup back into the bowl. "It's flavorless. Just water," he shouted. I immediately began to apologize. "I'm sorry, son. I must have forgotten the salt. Let me fix it." But my words didn't matter. In an instant, he sprang from his chair like an enraged animal, seized the bowl, and hurled it straight at me. The hot soup splashed across my face, burning my skin, and shards of porcelain sliced my lip. "You're worthless," he bellowed, gripping my arm so tightly I knew the mark would stay. 40 years as a secretary, and you can't even make a simple soup? pathetic. Then he shoved me hard against the wall. The back of my head struck the tile and my vision exploded with stars. But he wasn't done. A slap landed so hard it made my ear ring, followed by another and another, each one duller, heavier, until I could barely stand. Then his tone shifted, cold, deliberate. "Savannah's bringing her friends for lunch tomorrow," he said as I shielded my face. "You'll cook something special. It has to be flawless. If you embarrass me, if anyone suspects how useless you really are, I swear I'll throw you out." Moments later, his rage melted away as if it had never existed. He knelt, lifted me up, and dabbed at the blood on my lip with a napkin. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured softly. "I just get frustrated. I know you can do better. It's for your own good. You have to learn." Then he turned off the light and went to bed, sleeping soundly while I sat trembling on the kitchen floor. I stayed there through the night, cleaning the splattered soup and gathering the shattered porcelain one piece at a time. Each sharp fragment I picked up felt like another piece of my dignity being swept away. My lips still bled, but the pain that pulsed inside me wasn't just from the wounds he left on my body. It wasn't the pain itself that hollowed me out that night. It was something deeper, darker. The realization that the person I had loved most in this world, my own son, had become the source of my suffering. As I scrubbed the kitchen floor, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to how everything had begun. Ethan hadn't always been this way. As a little boy, he was tender, kind, always reaching for my hand. When his father walked out on us at 8 years old, it became just the two of us. Mother and son against the world. I worked endless hours, juggling double shifts to make sure he never went without. I put him in the best private school I could manage, bought him fine clothes, paid for piano lessons, English tutoring, anything he ever asked for. I found a way to provide. Maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe by giving him everything so easily, I raised a man who never learned gratitude, effort, or empathy. I handed him the world on a silver plate and never asked for respect in return. Now, 35 years later, I'm the one bearing the weight of those choices. Before dawn, I heard the sound of his steps descending the stairs, steady and deliberate. My heart began pounding, the familiar rush of dread spreading through me. It's strange how fear can become a daily rhythm, how you can live on edge even inside your own home. Ethan entered the kitchen in his usual black suit, phone in hand, his face expressionless. He didn't ask for breakfast. He just sat and waited for me to place it before him. I served his scrambled eggs, black coffee, and toasted bread in silence while he scrolled through emails, barely noticing my presence. At 7:30, Savannah appeared, her heels striking the floor in sharp, confident beats. She wore a fitted yellow dress that caught the morning light, her every movement polished and precise. I wondered if she ever really saw me. The bruises, the trembling hands, the way I flinched when Ethan's tone hardened. "Good morning, Mrs. Davis," she said with her usual sugary politeness. "How are you today?" "Fine, thank you," I lied, like always. "Would you like some breakfast?" "Just coffee," she replied, light, with sweetener. As I poured her cup, I noticed her gaze lingering on me. Her eyes flicked toward my swollen lip, then to the faint bruise showing beneath my blouse collar. For one fragile second, I thought she might ask, that maybe she'd finally see. But her expression didn't change. She simply turned back to her phone, her smile untouched, as if nothing at all were wrong. Ethan finished eating and fixed his gaze on me, his voice calm but cold. "Remember what I said last night, Mom?" he asked. "Savannah's bringing 3 of her friends for lunch, so make something special. Seafood pasta, Caesar salad, dessert, and buy white wine. The good kind, not that cheap stuff you usually get." He pulled 3 $20 bills from his wallet and handed them over as though he were doing me a favor. $60. That was what he gave me to feed 5 people, while he spent more than that on a single shirt. Then he leaned close, lowering his voice so Savannah wouldn't hear. "And don't forget the makeup I bought you. Cover those marks. If any of her friends ask questions or say anything about how you look, you'll regret it. Understand?" My hands started trembling, and I nodded silently. He smiled then, brushed a kiss across my forehead like the doting son he pretends to be, and they left the house together. The moment the door shut, I sank into a chair, feeling the air leave my body. $60 for a fancy meal. Fresh seafood alone costs nearly $30 a pound, and a decent bottle of wine another $20. How could I possibly make it work? But the money wasn't the worst part. It was the fear of having to play the role again, the cheerful, proud mother-in-law. While inside, I was breaking, living as a prisoner in the house I once owned. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look familiar. My lower lip was swollen and dark. A small cut split the corner of my mouth. My eyes were raw from tears, and a deep bruise spread down my neck toward my collarbone. I picked up the expensive foundation Ethan had given me, the kind used by polished women like Savannah. Slowly, I began to cover every trace of what he'd done, blending layer over layer until my skin looked smooth again. Each brushstroke felt like erasing the truth, like painting a mask I'd have to wear for the rest of the day. As I brushed on the makeup, my mind replayed every morning I'd done this exact same thing, layer after layer, to hide the damage, to cover the truth beneath foundation and powder. I'd lost count of how many times I'd told the same tired lies. I tripped over the table. The closet door slipped out of my hand. I fell down the stairs. Each excuse crafted to protect Ethan's image, to keep the world from knowing what really went on behind these walls. With my list clutched tightly, I went out to do the shopping, my face perfectly made up, my heart hollow. At the supermarket, I stretched those $60 until the bills almost tore. Frozen shrimp instead of fresh prawns, discount wine that looked expensive enough, pasta from the clearance shelf. Every coin, every choice weighed carefully. While waiting in line, I heard a familiar voice. It was Clarice, my neighbor, a kind widow in her 60s who'd always had a soft smile for me. "Hello, Monica," she greeted warmly. "How have you been, dear? I haven't seen you in the yard lately." "Oh, hi, Clarice," I answered, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, just busy with things around the house." Her eyes studied my face a moment longer than usual, and I saw her gaze pause at my mouth. "Did you hurt yourself?" she asked gently. My pulse quickened. "No, nothing like that," I said quickly. "I just bumped into the closet door last night. You know how clumsy I can be." Clarice frowned slightly but didn't press. "Well, if you ever need anything, you know where I am. I'm usually home in the afternoons," she said with such simple sincerity that it nearly broke me. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with real warmth, without judgment or suspicion. For a fleeting second, I wanted to tell her everything, the bruises, the threats, the endless fear, to beg her for help. But Ethan's words echoed like chains around my mind. "If you ever open your mouth, if you tell anyone what happens here, you'll regret it. Nobody will believe you. You're just a crazy old woman living off her son's charity." So I swallowed my truth, forced a polite smile, and said softly, "Thank you, Clarice." "You're very kind," I told Clarice before heading back inside, where I threw myself into work like a woman possessed. Everything had to be flawless before noon when Savannah and her friends were due to arrive. I scrubbed every surface, polished the floors, and laid out the fine china I hadn't touched in years. I even arranged a vase of flowers in the center of the dining table, hoping the small touch might keep Ethan's temper at bay later. As I moved around the kitchen, Clarice's words kept circling in my mind. "If you ever need anything, you know where I live." Did she suspect the truth? Had she heard the shouting that echoed through the walls at night? At 11:30, the phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Davis?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, speaking," I replied. "This is the accountant from your son Ethan's firm," he said. "We need to discuss some irregularities in the company accounts. Could you come by the office this afternoon?" My breath caught. "Irregularities? I don't understand." The man hesitated. "I'd rather not explain over the phone, Mrs. Davis. Please come at 3. It's quite urgent." Then the line went dead, leaving my hands shaking around the receiver. Discrepancies in the accounts. What could Ethan possibly have done? The thought made my stomach twist, but I had no time to dwell on it. At exactly noon, the doorbell rang. Savannah was punctual, as always. I took a deep breath, dabbed at my foundation, and forced a pleasant smile before opening the door. There she stood, radiant in a pale pink dress, surrounded by 3 impeccably dressed women. They looked like they'd stepped straight off the pages of a fashion magazine, their designer bags gleaming, their shoes worth more than my monthly pension. "Hello, Mrs. Davis," Savannah said sweetly, her voice sugary and performative. "Let me introduce my friends. This is Beatrice. She's in human resources. Brenda works in marketing, and this is Evelyn from legal." The moment she said the last name, my pulse stopped cold. Evelyn. The name hit me like a blow. It couldn't possibly be chance. When I looked closely, my breath caught. It was her. Evelyn Brooks, my younger sister, the one I hadn't seen in over 2 years. Her expression mirrored my shock, though she masked it quickly, slipping into composure as if nothing were amiss. Evelyn had always been sharper than me, quicker to read a situation. The moment her eyes met mine, I knew she sensed something wasn't right. The heavy makeup, the tense smile, the way my hands trembled. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Davis," she said smoothly, her tone formal as if we were strangers. "Your daughter-in-law has told us such wonderful things about you." Her act was flawless. I forced a polite nod and led them to the dining room, where everything gleamed exactly as Ethan had ordered. The lace tablecloth, my mother's china, crystal glasses that hadn't seen daylight in years. I served lunch carefully, fighting to keep the dishes from shaking in my hands. Against all odds, the shrimp pasta had come out perfectly. The salad was crisp, the bread still warm from the oven, and the tiramisu soft and sweet. Savannah and her friends chatted freely about office gossip, weekend getaways, and new handbags, their laughter floating through the air while I moved quietly between the kitchen and the table. Evelyn, however, never stopped watching me. I could feel her gaze following every step, the way she used to look at me as a child when she knew I was keeping a secret. Her eyes said she recognized the fear beneath my painted face, even if her lips stayed silent. "This is wonderful," Beatrice said between bites. "Did you make all of this yourself, Mrs. Davis?" "Yes," I replied, managing a strained smile. "I love cooking. It's always a pleasure to prepare something special for such lovely guests." "Ethan's very fortunate to have such a devoted mother-in-law," Brenda added. "It's rare these days to find women who still take pride in running a home." Savannah's smile widened, glowing with pride. "That's true," she said, glancing at me with that same smug sweetness, as if she'd trained me perfectly for the role I was forced to play. "Mrs. Davis always takes care of everything," Savannah said brightly. "It's like having a housekeeper, only better, because she does it with love." Her words sliced through me, though I kept the pleasant smile frozen on my face. A housekeeper. That's all I was to her. Not a mother, not a woman who had once built a life, but a servant paid in guilt and fear. Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "And what did you do before, Mrs. Davis? Were you always at home?" For the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of pride stir inside me. "I worked for 40 years as an executive secretary at Sullivan and Associates," I replied steadily. "I retired 3 years ago." At that, Evelyn's eyes brightened with recognition. Sullivan and Associates was one of the most respected firms in the city, the same place where she had interned during law school. "Really?" she said, feigning polite surprise. "I know that firm. Excellent reputation. You must have met quite a few prominent people over the years." "I did," I said, allowing myself a faint but genuine smile. Judges, prosecutors, top attorneys. I even assisted on some major cases. Mr. Sullivan always said I was indispensable. I saw Savannah shift uncomfortably in her chair, her smile tightening. She didn't like the attention drifting toward me. Didn't like hearing about a version of me that was competent, respected, more than the meek shadow she saw each morning. "Well," she interjected quickly, her tone sugary again. "Now Mrs. Davis is retired and finally enjoying her rest. Ethan handles everything for her, her finances, her needs. He's such a thoughtful son." Evelyn's gaze locked on mine at those words, sharp and searching. She didn't need to say anything. I could tell she understood that something about Savannah's perfect story didn't add up. I know my sister too well, and I could see it in her eyes. Savannah's words didn't make sense to her. Evelyn knew that a woman who had spent 4 decades working at a major law firm wouldn't suddenly need her son to manage her money. The conversation at the table carried on about harmless things, office gossip, travel plans, new restaurants, but an invisible weight hung between us. Evelyn kept stealing glances at me, sharp and deliberate, and I could tell she was piecing something together. When I went into the kitchen to bring out dessert, she followed quietly. "Need a hand?" she asked, though her voice told me that wasn't the real reason she'd come. "No, thank you," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the plates. Then she lowered her voice and spoke my name, my real name, for the first time that day. "Monica," she whispered. "Are you okay? You don't seem like yourself." For a brief second, the walls I'd built around myself began to crack. I wanted to fall into her arms, tell her everything, the beatings, the fear, the humiliation, to beg her to take me away. But just then, I heard the sound of keys turning in the front door. Ethan was home early. "Everything's fine, Evelyn," I said quickly, forcing composure back into my voice. "I'm just tired, that's all." Ethan walked in, wearing his usual flawless mask of charm, his suit crisp, his expression warm and calculated. He greeted the women smoothly, kissed Savannah on the cheek, and cast me a glance that said, "I'd better have done everything right." "How are the most beautiful ladies from the office?" he said with that practiced charisma that fooled everyone. "I hope my mother treated you well." "She's wonderful," Beatrice replied cheerfully. "Your mother is absolutely lovely." Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder then, and my whole body stiffened. He noticed and pressed harder, just enough for me to feel the threat beneath the smile. "She's the best mother in the world," he said, his tone all honey, always thinking of others, always sacrificing herself for the family. His fingers dug deeper into my shoulder through the fabric, a subtle reminder of what would happen once the guests were gone. The women began gathering their things after dessert, their laughter still floating through the house. One by one, they thanked me and walked out, until only Evelyn remained. As she reached the door, she took my hand gently. "It was lovely meeting you, Mrs. Davis," she said aloud for Ethan's benefit, her tone light and polite. But then she leaned closer and whispered, "We'll see each other soon." Her words lingered in my mind as the door closed behind them. Ethan turned the lock, and the warmth instantly drained from his face. The pleasant, charming sun vanished, replaced by the man I truly knew. "You did fine today," he said flatly. "For once, you didn't embarrass me." It wasn't praise, just a reminder that I'd managed to meet his impossible expectations. While I gathered plates and wiped the table, he disappeared into his room to change. On his way out, he tossed one last sentence over his shoulder. "By the way, the technician's coming tomorrow to check your computer. Says you've been visiting some questionable sites." My heart froze. I didn't even own a computer. I used his when I needed to look things up. The only strange pages I had opened were about domestic violence shelters, hotlines, and resources for women like me. He knew. He knew I'd been trying to find a way out. Then my phone rang. It was the same accountant who had called earlier. "Mrs. Davis," he said urgently. "Can you come in at 3 this afternoon? It's important." I glanced at the clock. 2:15. Ethan was in his bedroom, likely napping. This might be my one chance. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll be there." I grabbed my purse and keys, slipped quietly out the door, and walked quickly down the street toward the bus stop, every step heavy with fear and anticipation. I didn't know what I was walking into at that office, but something deep inside told me everything was about to change. As the bus approached, Evelyn's words echoed in my head. "We'll see each other soon." She had noticed. She understood. And for the first time in what felt like forever, a faint, trembling spark of hope flickered inside me. When the bus pulled up before the towering glass structure where Ethan worked, one of those sleek downtown buildings that gleamed with wealth and power, I straightened my back and stepped inside, ready to face whatever waited beyond those doors. I had never set foot in that building before. For years, Ethan had kept his professional world sealed off from me, as though his career were some private territory I had no right to enter. My hands shook as I rode the elevator up to the 18th floor, where the name Northern Business Corporation gleamed on the wall in polished metal. At the reception desk, a neatly dressed young woman with a polite smile directed me toward the accountant's office. My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear her instructions. When I stepped inside, a man in his 50s rose to greet me. He wore glasses, a dark suit, and a somber expression. "Mrs. Davis? I'm Adrian Castillo, the company's head accountant. Thank you for coming on such short notice." I nodded and sat opposite him, doing my best to appear composed even as my hands trembled in my lap. Adrian's calm professionalism only made me more uneasy. He opened a thick folder filled with papers and looked at me steadily. "Ma'am, I need to ask you a few questions about your bank account," he said. "We've noticed certain financial movements over the past several months that concern us." "My bank account?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "What does that have to do with Ethan's company?" Adrian hesitated for a moment, then sighed. His eyes softened, and I saw something like pity there. "Mrs. Davis, I'm afraid this will be difficult to hear. We've uncovered evidence that your son, Ethan Davis, has been transferring company funds into your personal bank account. Money that's later withdrawn in cash. It felt like the air was sucked out of the room." My stomach twisted. "That can't be true," I whispered. "Ethan is a model employee. He'd never do something like that." Adrian slid several printed statements across the desk. "I'm sorry, but the records are clear. Over the last 6 months, he has redirected more than $50,000 from corporate accounts. The funds first go into his personal account, then almost immediately to the one you share with him. $50,000. My head spun. It wasn't enough that he'd broken me physically and emotionally. He had turned me into an accessory to his crimes without my knowledge. "I swear I didn't know anything about this," I said, my voice cracking. "He controls my finances completely. I've never approved a single transfer." "We know," Adrian said softly, his tone careful, almost apologetic. "That's why I reached out before any legal action was taken. We need you to file a formal statement confirming that the account was misused without your consent. It's the only way to protect yourself, Mrs. Davis, to make sure you're not implicated in what your son has done." The room spun around me. My stomach churned. I wasn't just a victim of his violence anymore. Now I was part of his crimes, drawn into them without even realizing it. "What will happen to Ethan if I do this?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Adrian's voice remained steady, professional, but there was a note of sadness in it. "If you proceed, he'll be charged with embezzlement and the fraudulent use of corporate accounts. These are serious offenses. He could face 5 to 10 years in prison." I left the office numb, the words echoing in my head. The city lights blurred as I wandered through the downtown streets, my thoughts tangled and heavy. My son, my own child, was not just an abuser, but a thief, a criminal who had used me as his cover. By the time I reached home, it was nearly 6 in the evening. Ethan was lounging on the couch, watching television, completely at ease, as though nothing in the world had changed. When he saw me walk in, his expression hardened into that familiar look of contempt. "Where have you been?" he demanded. I came home, and the place was still a mess after lunch. For the first time in years, I met his gaze without flinching. "I was at your office," I said quietly. The words seemed to freeze him. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced for a fleeting second by fear. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice lower now, dangerous. "I was at your office, Ethan," I repeated, steady this time. "I spoke with the accountant. I know what you've done." He rose from the couch slowly, his movements deliberate and tense, like a predator circling its prey. The air between us felt charged, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which of us was more afraid. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. I think you're confused." $50,000, I said, my voice growing steadier. $50,000 you've stolen from your company using my bank account. Ethan moved toward me, and for the first time in ages, I refused to shrink back. Something inside me shifted that afternoon, a small, stubborn flame of defiance. "Listen to me, you stupid old woman," he growled, low and menacing. "You have no idea what you're saying." He claimed the money belonged to him, that I owed him for everything he had invested in me over the years. My meals, my shelter, my clothing. "With my own money," I answered, firm. "My pension, my savings, the wages I earned through 40 years of work." He clutched my arm, but this time I fought back. "Let go of me." I screamed at the top of my lungs, and his grip loosened in surprise. After 3 years of silence, I was finally shouting at him. "You're crazy," he spat, though his tone lacked the old certainty. "No one will believe you. You're a senile old woman who doesn't even know what she's saying." "The accountant believed me," I told him. "The documents speak for themselves. The transfers are registered. Everything is documented." For a few seconds, he said nothing as he absorbed that. Then his face went harder. "If you open your mouth, if you file any kind of complaint, I swear I'll destroy you." He threatened me openly. "This house is also in my name. I can kick you out on the street tomorrow, and without my help, without my money, you'll die alone like a dog." But his threats no longer cowed me. Something new, a strength I had not known I possessed, rose inside. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Ethan," I told him, and as the words left my mouth, I felt how true they were. For the first time in 3 years, I was not afraid. He raised his hand to strike, but at that instant the doorbell rang. "Monica!" Clarice called from outside. "Monica, is everything all right? I heard screaming." Ethan slowly lowered his hand. He couldn't strike me with witnesses standing outside. His image mattered too much. "Go see what she wants," he ordered through clenched teeth. "And you'd better not say anything stupid." My knees were shaking as I opened the door. Clarice stood there, worry etched across her face, holding a casserole dish in her hands. "Hello, dear," she said gently. "I brought you some stew I made, but I heard shouting and got concerned." Over her shoulder, I noticed another woman beside her, and my breath caught. It was Evelyn. She was dressed casually, her hair pulled back, trying to look like an ordinary neighbor, but I knew her instantly. "Hi," Evelyn said smoothly, pretending not to know me. "I'm new to the neighborhood and just stopped by to visit Mrs. Davis. I hope we're not interrupting anything." Ethan appeared behind me, the charm back on his face like a mask snapping into place. "Not at all, ladies," he said, smiling broadly. "My mother just got a little upset because she burned dinner. You know how older women get about these things." Clarice shot him a long, unreadable look. "Right," she said evenly. "Well, Monica, here's the stew. And remember, if you need anything at all, I'm right next door." Evelyn met my gaze, her eyes steady. "Yes, Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice calm but deliberate. "Anything you need, day or night." When they left, Ethan slammed the door so hard the walls trembled. "Nosy old women," he muttered. Then his tone turned icy. "But this isn't finished. Tomorrow we're going to the bank together. You're going to sign whatever papers I give you. You'll withdraw any complaint and you'll tell them it was all a misunderstanding." "No," I said quietly. His head snapped toward me. "What do you mean? No? I'm not signing anything. I told him, my voice steady. I'm not taking back the complaint, and I'm done being part of your crimes. The fury that flashed in his eyes was unlike anything I'd seen before, stripped of pretense, pure hatred. Fine, he said, his tone suddenly calm, almost measured. If that's how you want to play it, we'll play. But when I'm done with you, you'll wish you were never born. I didn't sleep that night. I could hear him pacing and talking on the phone behind his locked door for hours. I didn't know what he was plotting, only that I had to be ready. Around 3 a.m, I heard a rustling outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw a shadow near the bushes. Clarice. She was crouched by the window, adjusting something. The next morning, I discovered what it was. Hidden among the leaves was a small security camera, its lens aimed straight at my house. Clarice knew something was terribly wrong, and she was gathering proof, quietly, bravely, in case the worst came. The next morning arrived cloaked in gray clouds and steady rain, the world outside matching the turmoil inside my heart. I heard Ethan stirring before dawn, his footsteps heavy, his voice low as he spoke on the phone. Something about his tone made the air feel electric with danger. When I finally went down to the kitchen, he was already there, perfectly dressed in his best black suit, the one he saved for big meetings. His tie was flawless, his hair slicked neatly into place. To anyone else, he would have looked like a polished, responsible man. To me, he looked like evil in a tailored jacket. "Good morning, Mom," he said in a voice too soft, too sugary. "I hope you slept well." The unnatural sweetness sent chills down my spine. I knew my son. This tone meant he was preparing something cruel. "Yes," I lied, pouring his coffee just like every other morning. "Good," he said, smiling faintly, his eyes cold. "Because today is going to be a very special day. I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday. All night, actually." He began eating breakfast with calm precision, spreading butter on his toast like nothing was wrong. But every movement made me tense. "I've decided you were right," he went on. "Maybe I've been too harsh with you. You're my mother, after all, and you deserve respect." His words stopped me cold. Ethan, admitting fault, speaking gently? It was so out of character that my instincts screamed it was an act, a setup. Then came the truth, slipping out as he continued eating. "That's why we're going to the bank together today. We'll settle this whole misunderstanding with the company. You're going to confirm that you authorized every transfer and that you knew exactly what was going on with your money." There it was, the reason for his sudden kindness. "I'm not going to do that, Ethan," I said, trying to steady my voice. His smile vanished instantly. "Of course you are, Mom," he said, his tone dropping to something dark and deliberate. "Because if you don't, some very unpleasant things are going to happen." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "No, Mom," he said evenly, finishing his coffee. "I'm just explaining how things are. Look around. This house, this table, your bed, the food you eat, all of it exists because I let it. And if I decide not to anymore." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The silence said everything. Then he unlocked his phone, scrolling casually. "Also," he added, his voice almost casual, "I've been considering calling a few doctors I know, specialists in geriatric mental health. They're experts in diagnosing things like early dementia." His eyes lifted to mine, gleaming with quiet malice. I understood exactly what he was saying, that he was willing to declare me insane if I didn't play his game. "You know," he said smoothly, "it's really sad when mothers start inventing stories, accusing their own sons of horrible things." The words hit me like a blast of ice. He wasn't just threatening to throw me out. He was threatening to destroy my credibility, to have me declared mentally unfit so no one would ever take me seriously again. He kept talking in that detached, deliberate tone. Savannah already knows, by the way. "I told her yesterday that you've been a bit confused lately. Even her friends noticed something odd about you at lunch." It was a lie, every word of it, but his voice was so controlled, so convincing, that for one terrifying second, I questioned myself. That was his true power. Not his fists, but the way he could twist reality until even I doubted what I knew was true. "So," he said finally, pushing back his chair, "we're going to the bank at 10. You'll wear your nicest dress, fix your hair, and smile as you sign every document they hand you. Understand?" I stayed silent, gathering plates just to keep my shaking hands busy. "I'm talking to you," he barked, his false charm gone in an instant. "Understood." "Understood," I murmured, hating the weakness in my own voice. Before heading to his office, he leaned toward me one last time. "Don't even think about leaving this house. Don't touch the phone. I'll be back at 9:30 to take you to the bank." The door slammed behind him, and I collapsed into the nearest chair. The tears that came weren't from sadness anymore. They were from fury, raw and boiling. Fury at him, at myself, at every year I'd spent trapped under his control. I sat there shaking until a soft tap sounded at the back door. "Monica," came a whisper through the glass. "Open up. Quickly. It's important." It was Clarice. She slipped inside, glancing around to make sure no one could see or hear us. "I heard everything," she said in a rush. "I've got the camera near your kitchen window. I recorded the whole conversation with your son." My heartbeat quickened. "Everything?" "Everything," she confirmed. "The threats, the blackmail, the way he tried to force you to lie about the stolen money. You've got proof now, Monica. He can't hide anymore." For the first time in days, hope flickered inside me. Fragile, but alive. "What can we do with it?" I asked. Clarice's lips curved into a confident smile. "I have a friend at the DA's office," she said quietly, "and I think it's time we paid her a visit." "Her name is Brenda," Clarice explained quickly, her voice low but firm. "She works at the district attorney's office. Domestic abuse and financial fraud are her specialty. But we need to go to her right now." Fear gripped me again, cold and paralyzing. "I can't," I whispered. "Ethan told me not to leave the house. If he finds out—" "Monica," Clarice said sharply, gripping my hands, "listen to me. If you go to that bank and sign those papers, your son walks away clean. He'll keep stealing. He'll keep hurting you, and you'll be the one blamed for it all. You'll be the one on record as his accomplice." Her words hit hard. Every one of them the truth I'd been too afraid to face. If I obeyed Ethan, I wouldn't just lose the last shred of my pride. I'd lose everything, even my freedom. "But if I don't go," I stammered, "he'll make good on his threats. He'll throw me out, say I'm crazy. He won't be able to do any of that," Clarice cut in. "We'll move faster than him. Brenda said the recordings are more than enough. With this evidence, they can arrest him before he even gets the chance to touch you again." I looked at the clock. It was 8:30. Ethan would be home in 1 hour. "Are you sure your friend can help me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Completely sure," she said. "But we have to leave now, Monica. It's our only shot." For a moment, I stood frozen. Then something inside me solidified. I walked to my bedroom, took my purse, and slipped my documents inside. My ID, my bank statements, the deed to the house, everything that still tied me to my own life. Then I turned the key in the door, stepped outside, and followed Clarice to her car. As we hurried down the street through the light morning drizzle, a feeling I hadn't known in 3 long years began to stir deep within me. A fragile, trembling sense of freedom. Courage. That's what it was. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was taking back control of my own life. The district attorney's office was an unassuming government building, all gray corridors and narrow rooms that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Brenda, the woman Clarice had mentioned, greeted us with calm professionalism. She was in her 40s, her dark eyes sharp and steady, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made me feel safe for the first time in a long while. After listening to the recordings and reviewing the evidence, she looked up at me. "Mrs. Davis," she said gravely, "your son's actions fall under several criminal offenses: domestic abuse, financial fraud, blackmail, and attempted obstruction of justice. My hands trembled slightly. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we can arrest him today," Brenda replied without hesitation, "but I need you to file an official complaint for each of these charges. Are you willing to do that?" I glanced at the clock. 9:15. In 15 minutes, Ethan would be arriving home to take me to the bank. I imagined him walking through the door, realizing I was gone, and the fury that would follow. But the fear didn't stop me this time. "Yes," I said, my voice firming. "I'm ready to file the complaint." Brenda nodded approvingly. "Good. While you fill out the paperwork, I'll coordinate with the police to have him taken into custody. Do you know where he is now?" "He should be arriving at my house around 9:30 to pick me up," I answered. "Even better," Brenda said, already dialing a number. "It's easier to arrest someone when we know exactly where they'll be." As I filled out the forms, Clarice stayed beside me, her hand steady on mine. "Are you absolutely sure, Monica?" she asked softly. "Once we sign these, there's no undoing it." I met her eyes and said, "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." At 10:30, Brenda's phone rang. She answered, listened, then gave a small nod. "They got him," she said, hanging up. "The police arrested Ethan at your home. He was shouting, breaking furniture, tearing through the place looking for you. He's in custody now and the charges are serious. It's very unlikely he'll be released on bail." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The air around me felt lighter, the invisible weight I'd carried for 3 endless years finally beginning to lift. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I knew what peace felt like. The peace of knowing that when I went to bed that night, I would sleep without fear. When we returned to my house that afternoon, it looked as though a storm had torn through it. The living room was in shambles. Cushions ripped open, furniture overturned, shards of porcelain and glass littering the floor. In the hallway, the framed photographs that once told the story of our family lay shattered, faces fractured beneath broken glass. "My God," Clarice murmured, staring at the devastation. "How could he have done all this in so little time?" I didn't need to guess. I knew that rage. The blind, uncontrollable fury that consumed Ethan when he lost control. I had witnessed it countless times, though usually I was the one absorbing its blows. Brenda, who had come with us to document the scene, moved methodically through the rooms, taking photographs. "This will strengthen your case," she said. "It's clear evidence of violent outbursts and property destruction. The judge will see exactly who he is." As we swept up the shattered glass and gathered what little could be salvaged, my phone began to ring. The number was unfamiliar. "Don't answer it," Brenda warned. "If it's him calling from jail, let it go to voicemail. We need everything recorded." When the call ended, I checked the messages. 5 of them, all from Ethan. His voice was nothing like the one that had terrorized me that morning. It was trembling, small, almost childlike. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "Mom, please get me out of here. It's all a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to hurt you. You know I love you. You're everything to me. Please, Mom, don't let me stay in this place. I'm your son, your only son." Each message grew more desperate than the last until the final one dissolved into sobs. Brenda listened silently before shaking her head. "This is classic manipulation," she said quietly. "Abusers cycle through threats, then remorse, then self-pity. Anything to regain control. He's not sorry, Monica. He's trying to make you feel guilty so you'll undo everything you've done." I nodded, understanding her words. But understanding didn't dull the ache in my chest. Hearing him cry, hearing him call me Mom in that broken voice, pierced something deep inside. For 35 years, he had been my child, my pride, my reason for living. And though I could see the monster he'd become, part of me still saw the boy I once held in my arms, the one who used to run to me for comfort. It was the cruelest truth of all. that a mother's heart can break for her child, even when that child is the one who shattered it. "Are you okay?" Clarice asked gently, noticing the distant look on my face. "It's complicated," I admitted. "I know I did the right thing, but he's still my son." That night, Clarice wouldn't let me return home. "Your house isn't safe right now," she said firmly. "Ethan has friends, and probably Savannah too. Someone might try to come after you." She was right. In his voicemails, Ethan had said that Savannah was handling things from the outside, whatever that meant. I didn't want to find out. Clarice's home was small but warm, full of soft light and quiet corners. She led me to a modest guest room with a twin bed and a little desk by the window. "It was my daughter's room before she got married," she explained with a kind smile. "Now it's yours, for as long as you need it." That night, I lay down on the bed and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. I didn't have to brace myself for Ethan's footsteps in the hall or his sudden outbursts in the middle of the night. I didn't have to flinch at every sound. The silence felt foreign, almost unsettling. Peace can feel terrifying when you've forgotten how to live inside it. The next morning, my phone rang early. It was Brenda. "Ethan's bail hearing is scheduled for 2 this afternoon," she said. "The judge will decide whether he'll stay in custody until the trial. With the evidence we've presented, it's unlikely he'll be released. But I need you to testify. Your words will help the court understand how dangerous he really is." By 2 o'clock, we were in a small courtroom. Ethan sat at the defense table, hands cuffed, wearing an orange jumpsuit. When he saw me enter, the softness he'd faked in his voicemails vanished. His expression hardened into a simmering glare. The same look I had seen so many times before, the one that promised vengeance. Savannah was there too, sitting among the spectators, dressed impeccably in beige silk and pearls, yet she looked pale, exhausted, as if the weight of it all had finally reached her. When our eyes met, I saw something unexpected flicker there: shame. The judge, a gray-haired man with kind but weary eyes, reviewed the files before speaking. "Mrs. Davis," he said, motioning for me to take the stand, "please tell the court, in your own words, what you have experienced in your home over the past few years." I inhaled deeply and began. I told them about the years of beatings, the threats, the humiliation, the way he had taken control of my money until I had nothing of my own left. My voice trembled, cracked, but I refused to stop. When I described the embezzlement, the $50,000 he had stolen and funneled through my account, I saw him stiffen in his seat, his jaw tightening as if he could will the words back into my mouth. For the first time, though, he couldn't silence me. His attorney, a slick young man in an immaculate navy suit, kept leaping to his feet with objections, but the judge waved him down each time with growing impatience. Then the judge turned back to me. "And what did your son say to you yesterday morning regarding your testimony, Mrs. Davis?" I steadied my voice. "He threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't lie for him. He said he'd throw me out of my own house and leave me with nothing." The judge nodded gravely, then reached for the file Brenda had provided. He placed a pair of headphones over his ears and listened to Clarice's recordings in full. The entire courtroom sat in heavy silence, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner. When he finally removed the headphones, his expression was grim. "Mr. Ethan Davis," the judge said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "The evidence presented here demonstrates a clear pattern of domestic violence, financial exploitation, and attempts to intimidate a witness. Given the seriousness of these charges and the risk you pose to the victim, your request for bail is denied. You will remain in custody until your trial date." Ethan shot to his feet, rage twisting his face. "This is a joke," he shouted. "That crazy old woman is lying. I'm a respectable citizen. I have rights." The bailiffs moved quickly, restraining him as he continued to struggle and yell. "You'll regret this, Mom," he screamed over his shoulder. When I get out, I'll make you pay for every second I've spent in here." His voice echoed through the courtroom, sealing his own fate. Every word proved what I had testified: his anger, his cruelty, his utter lack of control. When the hearing ended, Savannah caught up with me in the hallway. "Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice trembling, "please, I need to talk to you." Brenda and Clarice stepped closer protectively, but I motioned for them to hold back. "What do you want, Savannah?" I asked, my tone cautious. "I want to apologize," she said, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was no pretense in her voice. I knew something was wrong in that house. I heard the shouting, I saw the bruises. I noticed how you flinched whenever he spoke to you. "Then why didn't you say anything?" I asked quietly. She lowered her gaze. "Because I was afraid. Ethan threatened me too. He said if I ever betrayed him, he'd destroy my career, my reputation, everything I'd built. And I believed him. I was weak. I let you suffer alone because I didn't want to lose my comfort." Her eyes filled with tears. "When they arrested him yesterday, I went through his office. I found documents, bank statements. He wasn't only stealing from the company, Mrs. Davis, he was stealing from me, too." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I saw her not as the elegant young woman who'd replaced me in my son's life, but as another of his victims, caught in the same web of fear and control I'd lived in for years. "We've been married for 2 years, Savannah said, her voice trembling but resolute, "and I never realized he was a fraud, not just at work, but in every part of his life. What are you going to do now?" I asked quietly. "I'm filing for divorce," she replied without hesitation, "and I'm going to testify against him. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm working with the DA's office to make sure he pays for everything he did, to you, to me, to everyone he deceived." As we left the courthouse together, something I hadn't felt in years began to stir inside me. Hope, real and steady. I had escaped my son's grasp, yes, but I was no longer standing alone. There were people beside me now, people willing to help me fight back. That afternoon, as we made our way back to Clarice's house, Brenda shared news that brightened that fragile spark even more. "The company Ethan worked for wants to reach a settlement," she said. "They're willing not to pursue any charges against you if you cooperate by returning the funds he transferred into your account. And as recognition that you were a victim, not an accomplice, they're offering you $20,000 in compensation." "$20,000?" I repeated, barely believing it. It was more money than I'd had access to in 3 long years. Money that meant freedom, a fresh start. "And what about my house?" I asked after a moment, my heart tightening. Ethan always said it was in his name, too. Brenda smiled, holding up a folder. "We checked. He lied. The deed is still solely in your name. He forged documents to make you believe otherwise, but legally, he has no claim to it at all. The house is completely yours, Monica. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could imagine a future. One where I wasn't walking on eggshells, one where I could choose my own path and breathe freely in my own home. But as I replayed Ethan's threats from the courtroom, "You'll regret this, Mom. I'll make you pay." I knew it wasn't over yet. He was behind bars, but the shadow of his rage still loomed. This was no longer just about survival. It was a fight for my life, my dignity, and the peace he had stolen from me. The war, I realized, was only beginning. 3 weeks after Ethan's arrest, my life had transformed, but not in the simple, peaceful way I had imagined. Though I was physically safe under Clarice's roof, my mind was still shackled to the years I had spent under his control. I existed in a state of quiet panic. Every small sound made me flinch. Every car that slowed near the house sent me running to the window. Every unknown number that flashed on my phone filled me with dread. I barely slept. My body was free, but my nerves hadn't caught up. Brenda told me it was normal. After long-term abuse, the fear doesn't vanish just because the danger's gone, she explained gently. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. Your body is still living in survival mode, always waiting for the next blow. Healing takes time. But it wasn't only trauma haunting me. Ethan had found new ways to reach me, even from behind bars. The first message arrived through a different attorney, not his official one, which made it even more unsettling. Inside the envelope was a single handwritten letter, his handwriting, precise and unmistakable. "Dear Mom," it began, "I hope you're enjoying your little victory. I hope you feel proud of yourself for betraying your own son. But remember this, it's not over. I know things about you that no one else knows. Secrets you've kept for 40 years from your time at that law firm. Secrets that could destroy your reputation and your freedom." I felt my pulse quicken as I read. What secrets could he possibly mean? I had worked as an executive secretary at Sullivan and Associates for decades. Yes, and handled sensitive documents, but I had never done anything criminal. Then I read the next lines, and my blood ran cold. "Remember the case of Williams versus the state 15 years ago? I found the documents you hid, the ones you altered to help Mr. Sullivan win that multi-million-dollar case. If those files ever come to light, you'll be the one facing prison for obstruction of justice." My hands began to shake so violently I almost dropped the letter. The words blurred together, but their meaning cut through clear as glass. Ethan wasn't just threatening me anymore. He was reaching into my past, twisting it into a new weapon. I could only vaguely recall the Williams versus the state case. It had been one of the hardest trials the firm ever handled. A massive lawsuit where our client, a pharmaceutical company, was accused of concealing deadly side effects from a popular drug. I remembered how tense those weeks had been, the pressure in the office almost unbearable. Mr. Sullivan himself had called me into his office one evening and asked me to reorganize certain files, remove duplicate or unnecessary memos that could cause confusion, he'd said. I had assumed it was standard procedure, that I was simply doing my job as a secretary. But now, reading Ethan's letter, I realized what it truly was. I had removed evidence, altered a case file, and even if I hadn't understood the full scope back then, legally, Ethan was right. I had technically participated in tampering with court materials. "I have copies of everything, Mom," the letter continued in his neat, careful handwriting. "If you don't drop the charges and publicly admit you lied about me, those documents will be in the DA's hands by the end of the week." 61-year-old secretary accused of helping cover up drug deaths. He described in chilling detail exactly how he would destroy me. The journalists he knew, the story he would sell, the way my name and photo would be plastered everywhere. I could already picture it. My face on the news, my life reduced to a single damning headline. Clarice found me sitting on the couch, the letter crushed in my trembling hands, tears streaming down my face. Without hesitation, she called Brenda. Brenda arrived quickly, read the letter, and frowned. "This is straightforward blackmail," she said. "But before we act, we need to verify whether his threats have any real foundation. Monica, tell me everything you remember about that case." I recounted every detail I could. The long hours, the frantic instructions from Mr. Sullivan, the way he had told me to reorder documents and remove internal memos that might confuse the defense strategy. "Did you realize then that what you were doing might be illegal?" Brenda asked gently. "No," I said, the truth heavy in my throat. "I was just following orders. Mr. Sullivan told me it was normal to protect confidential information. I didn't question it." Brenda exhaled slowly. "Legally speaking, ignorance doesn't erase liability. If you altered evidence, even under instruction and without criminal intent, it still counts as a violation." Her words hit me like a second collapse. Just when I thought I had freed myself from Ethan's control, he had found a new way to trap me, this time with my own past. "What should I do?" I asked, panicked. "If I drop the charges, he'll get out and kill me. If I don't, he'll expose me and I'll go to jail for something I didn't even understand 15 years ago. First, breathe, Brenda said firmly. Second, we'll find out what he actually has and how he obtained it. Third, I'll consult with my colleagues about minimizing the damage if those documents are real. You're not alone in this, Monica. The next few days were chaos. A blur of legal meetings, sleepless nights, and endless phone calls. Brenda and her team dove into old archives, requesting sealed court files and reviewing every page of the Williams case. They searched for inconsistencies, for any sign of tampering that could match Ethan's claims. It became clear that my life, once again, hinged on the truth buried inside a box of dusty papers from 15 years ago. During those weeks, I lived like a shadow of myself. Every knock at the door made my heart stop. Every unfamiliar car parked nearby convinced me they were coming to arrest me. Sleep became a stranger. My mind replayed Ethan's words over and over until I could hardly breathe. Through it all, Clarice was my anchor. She wasn't just giving me shelter. She was giving me something I hadn't had in years: compassion. She'd sit with me every night while I sobbed into a cup of chamomile tea, her voice soft but unwavering. You're not alone, Monica. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not that frightened woman anymore, not his victim. But deep down, I didn't believe her. I was that frightened woman. Ethan had managed, even from a jail cell, to drag me back into the same pit of terror he'd kept me in for 3 years. Then, a week later, another letter came. Colder, sharper than the first. I see you haven't learned your lesson, Mom, it began. You still think you can challenge me. That's fine. Now everyone will know what kind of person you really are. Inside the envelope were several printed photographs, snapshots of documents from Sullivan and Associates. I recognized my own handwriting scrawled in the margins, the altered dates, missing pages, and annotations that I vaguely remembered making all those years ago. These will be in the papers tomorrow night, the letter continued, unless you come to see me in jail before Friday. You'll come alone, no lawyers, no witnesses, and you'll bring a signed statement asking to withdraw all charges. You'll say it was all a misunderstanding caused by your mental deterioration. That last phrase, mental deterioration, froze my blood. It was the same threat he had used before, the same weapon he'd used to silence me. But it didn't end there. If you don't show up, the letter went on. Not only will the photos go public, but I'll release the recordings too. Recordings. My hands shook as I read. Did you think I didn't know about the cameras in the house, Mom? The letter taunted. I'm not that stupid. I have my own footage of you taking cash from clients at Sullivan and Associates, money you never declared, tax evasion, Mom, another 15 years in prison. I felt the room spin. This wasn't just blackmail anymore, it was war. Ethan had built a trap years in the making, a network of threats and lies designed to destroy me piece by piece. He might have been behind bars, but he was still in complete control of my fear. Ethan had prepared for this moment far better than I could ever have imagined. Every letter, every threat. It was all part of a meticulous plan he had built long before his arrest. He had gathered evidence, studied my weaknesses, and anticipated the exact way I would react once I dared to stand up to him. When Brenda finished reading the second letter, her face turned grave. She set the papers down carefully and looked me straight in the eye. Monica, she said quietly, I need the full truth about your time at Sullivan and Associates. Everything. If there was ever anything irregular, any cash payments, any detail you might have overlooked, I need to know it now. So I told her. I told her about the Christmas bonuses that Mr. Sullivan handed out every year, thick envelopes filled with cash that he called personal gifts. I never declared them. I thought they were tokens of appreciation. I told her about the clients who had sometimes slipped me money as thanks for helping them with last-minute filings or scheduling emergencies. I hadn't reported that either. In total, Brenda asked, how much money are we talking about? Across 4 decades? I hesitated, ashamed. Maybe Maybe $1,000, I said. Brenda quickly did the math. With interest and penalties, the IRS could calculate that as roughly $40,000 in unpaid taxes. It's not catastrophic, but it's technically tax evasion. I buried my face in my hands. Ethan had built the perfect trap. If I continued to pursue justice, he could expose me. If I stopped, he would walk free and destroy more lives. Either way, I lost. Brenda was silent for a long moment, pacing the small living room as she thought. Then she turned to me with a spark of resolve in her eyes. "There is a third path," she said slowly, "one neither of you will expect." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "We get ahead of him," she said. "We go public, voluntarily. We confess every minor infraction before he can use them against you. If we do that, we reframe the narrative completely. We show the world that your son is a manipulator, that even behind bars he's still trying to control and terrorize you. The courts and the press will see that pattern of abuse for what it is." The idea made my stomach twist. It meant admitting my mistakes openly, facing whatever legal or public consequences followed, and surrendering the little privacy I had left. But Brenda was right. It would strip Ethan of his last weapon. "If we do this," she continued, "he can't touch you anymore. Once the truth is out, there's nothing left for him to use against you. The power shifts entirely to your side." I walked to the window, staring across the street at my old house. The windows shattered, the curtains torn, the remnants of a life that no longer existed. It stood like a monument to everything I had endured, and everything I had yet to reclaim. For the first time, I understood what freedom might truly cost. That house across the street, broken, silent, and stripped of life, symbolized everything I had been and everything I could still become. It held my past, my regrets, my fears, but also the possibility of something new. Freedom. A clean slate. "Let's do it," I said at last, turning to Brenda. "I'm done living in fear. I'm done letting my son control me from a prison cell." Brenda's lips curved into a determined smile. "Good," she said. "Tomorrow we'll give Ethan the shock of his life." The day of reckoning arrived faster than I expected. Brenda arranged a press conference for 2 o'clock that afternoon, a public, transparent confession where I would lay out every mistake Ethan had tried to use against me. The plan was risky, but it was our only way to take back power. That morning, I woke up with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The fear that had wrapped itself around me for so long was gone, replaced by something steady and unshakable. I knew what I had to do, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of the truth. Clarice stayed by my side, helping me prepare. I chose a gray dress. Simple. Dignified. The same one I used to wear for important meetings at Sullivan and Associates. I applied a touch of makeup, enough to look composed but not concealed. I wanted to face the world exactly as I was. No masks, no pretenses. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Monica?" Clarice asked again, her brow furrowed with concern. "Once you speak those words, there's no taking them back." "I've never been more sure of anything," I said, hearing my voice steady and strong. For 3 years, I lived like a captive, afraid of what he'd do, of what the truth would cost me. I won't live that way anymore. I'm done being a prisoner to fear or to my own past. Around noon, Brenda called with unexpected news that caught me completely off guard. "Monica," she said, her tone urgent but excited, "something remarkable just happened. Raphael Miller, Ethan's former boss, wants to meet with you before the press conference." "Raphael Miller?" I repeated, startled. He was the senior executive who had uncovered Ethan's embezzlement, the one who had looked devastated when the full scope of it became clear. "Yes," Brenda confirmed. "He said it's important and can't wait. He wants to speak to you in person." We met an hour later in Brenda's office. Raphael arrived wearing a tailored navy suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. There was an air of gravity about him, the kind of man who had seen too much and carried it quietly. "Mrs. Davis," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for agreeing to see me. There's something you need to know. Something that might change everything." When I entered the office, Raphael immediately stood up, his expression both kind and solemn. "Mrs. Davis," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse. "Before anything else, I want to apologize. If I had been more vigilant, if I had noticed the warning signs earlier, perhaps none of this would have happened. Perhaps you wouldn't have endured what you did." His words took me off guard. "You couldn't have known what was happening inside my home," I said softly. "Maybe not," he admitted, gesturing for me to sit. "But I should have recognized what was happening with the company's accounts. Your son's theft didn't begin 6 months ago, as we first believed. It began 2 years ago." My breath caught in my throat. 2 years. "Yes," Raphael confirmed. "At first the amounts were small, so minor that our accountants dismissed them as clerical mistakes. But after we began our internal audit following your complaint, we uncovered a consistent pattern of fraud. Ethan had been siphoning money for quite some time." Brenda leaned forward, her tone calm but intent. "How much exactly are we talking about?" $130,000, Raphael said gravely, all of it funneled through various accounts he controlled, including yours, Mrs. Davis. A wave of sickness rose in me. I had been his victim in every possible sense, physically, emotionally, and now legally. For 2 full years, he had been using me as the perfect cover for his crimes. "But that's not all," Raphael went on. "Once Ethan was arrested, our legal team expanded the investigation. We discovered he had been forging internal reports, altering company contracts, and even selling confidential data to competitors." I stared at him, stunned. "Why are you telling me all this?" For the first time since we began talking, Raphael's expression softened into something close to a smile. "Because we'd like to offer you a position with us, Mrs. Davis." For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him correctly. "A position?" He nodded. "During our review, we looked into your professional record. 40 years at Sullivan & Associates. Spotless reputation, extensive experience managing complex legal documentation. We could use someone like you to help us rebuild what your son's actions damaged." I sat there speechless, hardly able to process the words. After weeks of fear and disgrace, the idea that someone still saw value in me, that someone trusted me, felt almost impossible. "The offer includes a salary of $4,000 a month," Raphael continued, "plus full health coverage, and a one-time compensation payment of $50,000 in recognition of the harm this situation caused you." I could barely speak. $4,000 a month, triple my pension, and $50,000 in restitution. For the first time in months, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel, but a door opening to light. "There's only one condition," Raphael said gently. "We'll need your cooperation during Ethan's trial. Your testimony will be essential to ensure that he faces full accountability, not just for what he did to you, but for everything he did to this company and its clients." I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "I'll testify. Whatever it takes to make sure he finally answers for it all, I'll do whatever it takes." At 2 o'clock sharp, the press room was already packed. Cameras flashing, microphones pointed toward the small podium where I was supposed to speak. Brenda had reached out to every local outlet, telling them that a survivor of domestic abuse would be making a public statement about being blackmailed by her abuser from jail. As I sat down under the blinding lights, a wave of nerves swept through me. But it wasn't the same fear that had haunted me for years. This wasn't fear of Ethan or of his fists or of the endless threats that had ruled my life. This was something entirely different, fear of freedom, the fragile, dizzying kind that comes when you finally realize your life belongs to you again. I took a breath, looked straight into the cameras, and began. My name is Monica Davis. I am 61 years old, and for the last 3 years, I have been a victim of domestic violence at the hands of my own son, Ethan Davis. From there, I told them everything: the beatings, the insults, the way he took control of my money, isolated me, and used my fear as his weapon. I spoke about the financial manipulation, the stolen pension, the constant humiliation. And then I went further, into the part he thought I would never reveal. During my 40 years as a secretary at Sullivan & Associates, I said, my voice growing stronger, I made mistakes. Mistakes I didn't understand at the time were wrong. But I take responsibility for them now. I described the Williams versus the state case, the altered documents, the cash I hadn't declared, every secret Ethan had tried to use against me. I left nothing out. My son found these mistakes and used them to blackmail me from jail, I continued. He threatened to expose me publicly if I didn't drop the charges against him. But today, I'm taking that weapon out of his hands. I would rather face the consequences of my own errors than remain a prisoner of his manipulation. The room fell completely silent. I could hear the faint clicking of cameras, the scribble of pens on notepads. Every pair of eyes in that room was fixed on me, not with judgment, but with something that felt like respect. I leaned closer to the microphone, to every woman trapped in fear, whether it's by a husband, a son, or anyone who uses love as a weapon. Hear me. Emotional blackmail, financial control, and threats of exposure are all forms of abuse. Don't let the fear of shame keep you in chains. Freedom is worth more than reputation. When I finished, the silence broke into a flurry of murmurs, flashes, and questions I barely heard. I had done it. I had told the truth, all of it, without flinching. Later that day, Brenda met me outside the courthouse. The district attorney's office has decided not to pursue charges against you, she said, her face softening with relief. Your confession and the fact that you were being blackmailed make you far more valuable as a witness than as a defendant. That night, for the first time in months, I turned the key to my own front door. The house still bore the scars of Ethan's rage, shattered glass, broken frames, dents in the walls, but it was quiet. It was mine. As I lay in bed, the silence felt almost sacred. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for footsteps in the hallway. I wasn't rehearsing apologies or excuses in my head. I was home, and I was free. Clarice refused to let me spend those first nights alone. She brought her robe and slippers, made tea for both of us, and stayed until the house no longer felt haunted by fear. As I finally lay down in my own bed, surrounded by the quiet stillness of my home, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 long years: complete ownership of my life. Ethan was still in jail, facing a mountain of charges that would likely keep him there for many years. His power over me was gone, stripped away the moment I stopped hiding. I had no more secrets left for him to twist or threaten me with. When the phone rang, I recognized the prison number instantly. But this time, my hand didn't tremble as I answered. Mom. It was Ethan's voice, faint and weary, drained of its usual venom. I saw your press conference on TV. And what did you think of it? I asked, my tone steady, calm in a way that surprised even me. You destroyed everything, he said, but his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hollow, full of a sadness that didn't move me the way it once would have. You destroyed my last chance to get out of here. No, Ethan, I replied quietly. You destroyed that chance the moment you chose to turn your mother into your victim. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then his voice came again, smaller, almost pleading. Are you ever going to forgive me? Someday, I said truthfully. When you take responsibility for what you did, when you seek real help, when you understand the damage you caused, maybe then I'll be able to forgive, but I'll never forget. I hung up the phone and switched it off. Tomorrow I would begin my new job, the first step into a life that finally belonged to me. But that night, I allowed myself to rest. Really rest in the quiet of my own home. No shouting, no footsteps, no fear. For the first time in 3 years, I was free. Yes, the road had been brutal. I had faced public scrutiny, admitted my own failures, and lost the son I once loved beyond reason. But I had also reclaimed something far more precious: my dignity, my independence, my peace. Ethan had learned too, though far too late, that victims can find their strength, that the power of secrets dies the moment truth steps into the light, and that justice, though slow, always arrives. And I had learned the most important truth of all. It's never too late to take back your life, no matter how many years you've spent living in someone else's shadow. This was my story, not of tragedy, but of liberation. And if it can help even one woman find the courage to break her own chains, then every scar, every sleepless night, and every tear was worth it.